Welcome to episode 10 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning, speaking to you from southeast London at my home here. For this episode, which I'm amazed I've reached, the 10th, I spoke to a really interesting, intelligent, generous, warm guy called Sylvain Despry. He was an illustrator, and worked with Ridley Scott, Stanley Kubrick, David Fincher, Tim Burton. In a way, he's kind of unfiltered. He says what he thinks, and what he thinks is pretty much spot on as far as I can tell. I came out of this conversation feeling pretty educated, actually, in a positive way. And I really hope that I can talk to him again in the future about some more of the specifics of his time with those directors that I mentioned. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the chat as much as I did, and I'll be back for a bit more jabbering at the end. So how did you first get involved in the artistic world? Was it something that you were destined to do? When did you realise you were on this path to become clearly a very multi-talented artist?
I don't know that it was a conscious thing. I think I was given permission to do it, so I did it. I think when I was a kid, I was lucky enough to grow up in an environment where this sort of thing was encouraged. Nobody said, don't do this, you know. And I remember my mother showing me some sketches she'd done, a beautiful kind of a tiger that was drawn in a style that was very much like sacred art, like Indian or something. It was in profile, and it was very symbolic but very beautiful, and I was very excited by that, and I thought, well, maybe I can do something like this. And nobody ever said don't do this, or this will be catastrophic, or you'll have a terrible life, or anything like that. But I don't think I ever decided anything. I just did it. And then it's kind of like being a trained monkey. You know, you do something well once and you get a reward. You know, people applaud, or they go, oh, look, he can do that. And so you do it again. And here we are. Years later.
Yeah. I mean, mentors are very important to us in whatever we end up doing in our lives. And did you have mentors from a young age, or whether you know, I see mentors as people that we have a private relationship with, we know personally, or they could be people that we look up to that we never get to meet. Were there any special mentors for you?
The mentor question is a very big one. We could talk about this for an hour. The thing is, what I've learned about mentors and people to whom you suggest that mentoring could be useful, need to approach this relationship almost like a substitute for something they may have been missing in their lives. In other words, I've never seen a person who had a solid, sound upbringing do well with mentoring. I think it's only people with absent fathers or absent mothers who gravitate toward some kind of compensation and become attracted to the idea of accepting a mentor in their lives. I've brought people to meet some of the artists I've known, like Jodorowsky or Mobius or people like that. And I could tell that there was only so far they were willing to go, largely because they were well-balanced human beings, and proximity after a while just kind of creates a problem for them, which it didn't for me because I'm completely imbalanced and I didn't have a father growing up. So mentors have been around me my whole life. That's all I have done. That's all I've had. And it started very early on. When I was a kid, somebody suggested I be taken to the planetarium because there was a wonderful guy who was working with lasers. We're talking in the early 1970s. You know, lasers were pretty amazing. And so I got to spend an afternoon in this lab with a guy showing me all kinds of experiments that he was conducting with lasers. And I was stunned. And that was my first kind of experience hanging out with a professional. And it was far from the last because in growing up, I ended up working. One of my first jobs in New York City was working for Neil Adams, who's quite a famous comic book artist. He's very famous in the 70s. And by the time I met him, he was running a sort of sweatshop in Manhattan, catering to advertising agencies and doing storyboards for advertising agencies. So that's kind of where I learned the craft of working in the ad business, which is very different from working in film, but has some fundamental principles which you can rely on. And I learned a lot from Neil. And so in a way, he was a mentor. He was my boss, but he was also a high authority in the illustration business. And the advice he gave me on a couple of occasions, I ended up using pretty much for most of my career, including working for people like Ridley Scott and people like that. One of the things I learned from Neil Adams, which was extraordinary, we used to get these horrible little sketches from art directors in ad agencies who dictated the sort of storyboard frames they wanted, but they couldn't draw. None of them. I mean, it's a prerequisite. If you were an art director in New York in a big ad agency, you couldn't possibly draw. So we'd get these sketches and we'd laugh, and say, oh, look at this head, big like a pumpkin. How can we frame around this? And Neil was always saying, don't laugh. He said, this is your client and he means to say something with this. So take this sketch and try to extract as much of the meaning that he's trying to pack into it so you can give him back what he's expecting to see. So we'd say, well, how can we do this? Look at the size of this head. He said, well, assume that what he means is that this is the proximity to the head. Assume that you can trace over his eyes and build a sketch out of this. And you'll see that by doing that, you won't have to redo every frame. It seems like nothing. Except years later, when I was working for Ridley, who's an amazing illustrator to begin with, if he did a sketch, I always had this thing in my mind thinking, assume that every aspect of the composition is something that is absolutely meaningful and give it back to him. So I'd look for right angles and shapes inside the frame and corners and edges and blocks. Maybe a third off to the side of the frame or something like that. I'd make sure that whatever tiny little line was in there meant something. It's useful. And it helped me. It helped me actually secure a position with Ridley where he felt very comfortable with whatever I gave him, because he's a master of composition. And even a tiny little sketch for him contains a lot of data. And I think he was disappointed in his life working with storyboard artists who just didn't get that what he did was essential, was critical, and had to be preserved. It's like transporting a cargo. So directors don't always do sketches for you, but there's always an indication of what they're after if you're cautious, if you listen carefully. And I think part of what I learned with people like Neil Adams was not to dismiss something, but actually focus on what it is that the person wants. So my next mentor after that was probably the most important one I had in illustration was Mobius. Jean Giraud, who's a French artist. Mobius passed away about 10 years ago. And I had a friendship / education with this guy that lasted over nearly 15 years. We were close. I knew him well. We spent a lot of time, and I worked with him, and I learned a lot. So that was mentoring. But I even made mentors out of anybody I met. I mean, people like Ridley, over the decade I worked for him, probably was also somebody I looked up to as a mentor. I don't think he was mentoring me, but I think I certainly treated it like that. I took as much from him as I could.
Yeah, because working for somebody like Ridley, I would feel very intimidated, even if I was as gifted as I wish I could be as an artist, because, as you say, he's an incredibly gifted artist himself. So how did you approach being able to translate what he wanted from his sketches into something that was maybe fresh to him? Because he obviously has an intention. His sketch might give you an intention of what he's looking for, but then he's also looking to you, surely, for something, to find something new in there also.
It was touch and go. I think, from the moment that I'd been hired on a job with him, I figured, well, he's hard enough to approach that if I have a gig, he must have seen something he likes. And fortunately for me, by that time, I had already worked quite a bit in New York in advertising agencies, where you basically work around the clock. You work until 4 a.m. in Manhattan, and you do this day in and day out. And I'd met people like David Fincher, and I'd done jobs for him, et cetera, et cetera. I'd met Tim Burton. I think by the time I met Ridley, I guess I'd gained enough confidence, if that makes any sense, that I didn't freeze up. I'd met celebrities. I'd met a lot of celebrities. For some reason, I've met some of the most famous people in the world. Don't ask me why. I worked, it's a bit embarrassing now, but I worked with Michael Jackson in his home. You know, we did storyboards in the middle of the night. So once you've done that, in a way, the sort of part of your brain that has to kick in and set aside the admiration or intimidation you may be feeling, that part of your brain takes over because you've built enough professionalism. I'm glad I didn't have to work with Ridley on day one coming out of school or whatever.
Yeah.
What was intimidating was just figuring out how his personality functioned, just because he's not much of a talker. And you could mistake him for somebody who's not paying attention or something, which would probably be costly. He's extremely aware, but doesn't talk much. He doesn't speak the way intellectuals, kind of layer words, but he's very bright. So I just remember my first day at work with him, where I came in and I was ready to sit down and bullshit, and he was like, "All right, page 3," and boom, started working immediately. And there was no chit chat, no foreplay. And in a way, that was the easiest thing about it, is that within seconds, we were talking about perspective and volume and shadows. And I was comfortable with that language, as opposed to trying to find my bearings on a personal level, which I could never have done. I would have been terrified.
Yeah.
But talking about drawing, I wasn't, because suddenly I was in a universe where I actually controlled a lot of things. So I think that's how I approached it. I thought, all right, well, I guess we're running,
And what film was that?
Before I worked on a film, I worked on commercials with him. But the first film we were involved in was I Am Legend, which never got made. Before that, I got hired under fairly unusual circumstances, because I lived in New York the very first time I met him, and I snuck into a party where I knew he was going to be and met him, and had a polite chat with him that went rather well, considering I knew nobody and I just went in and kind of introduced myself. And then his producer, a wonderful woman by the name of Cindy Akins, tapped me on the shoulder when I left a few minutes later. And she said, "I'm his producer. Do you happen to ever be in Los Angeles?" And I said, "Oh, sure, I'll be there next week." and she said, "Oh, good. Well, give us a call." And okay, I went home and I booked a flight immediately.
Of course, yeah.
and so next week I called and I said, "I'm here." And she said, "Oh, cool. So I don't get it. Do you live here or in LA?" And I said, "Oh, I live here." So I started working for his company almost immediately. And then I had to figure out how to get a place, how to go back to New York and move my stuff and all that. But so that's how I started. And I on I Am Legend, it was really the first time that I was one-on-one with him in an environment where it looked like I was going to be there for months. There wasn't going to be anybody else. So I think we were 3 people working on the film. There was myself, there was an artist named Tani Kunitaki, who was one of the main illustrators on Matrix. Wonderful guy. And he was doing a lot of the background, designs of buildings and disheveled buildings and stuff. Wonderful. And there was Arthur Max, production designer. And we worked like that in an office for 6 months or something. So that's kind of like... it's a fascinating experience, because very quickly you get to know these guys, because you eat with them every day. Yeah. Talk to them all day. They're all you see. And after a while, you're no longer dealing with the celebrity, but you're dealing more with the job at hand. And then you can actually appreciate what they do. I think Ridley is very intimidating in the sense that he's a keen artist, very, very sharp artist with an incredible sense of composition, which you can see in his films. It doesn't matter who the DP is. It doesn't matter who the production designer is. You look at a Ridley frame and you go, "Oh, here he is. I know this. I'm familiar with this." And I just watched Raised by Wolves, and so many of the compositions in the first 2 episodes, to me anyway, I read them like Ridley compositions. I recognize all the horizontals and all the layers. He works in a lot of triptychs, a lot of thirds, and skews compositions slightly. Never has like a straight down the middle vanishing point the way Kubrick would have done it.
Yeah.
Very different. But I've become so accustomed to identifying his sort of the palette of composition that he uses that I spot it immediately. And there's no two people like him,
Yeah, you're right about him being intimidating. I've spoken to two people that work with him, and both of them said the same phrase. When I first met him, we seemed to hit it off, and they kind of shrugged. They weren't getting the feedback that they might get from your average person, but they seemed to hit it off, and that was enough for Ridley to kind of engage
You never
them.
do. I never. I mean, I think I've known Ridley since the 90s. I forget when. Early 90s or something, and I've never felt that his finger wasn't on the eject button at some point, that you could just go, shoot up.
Keeps
in the
you on
sky.
your toes, though.
Yeah, you are on your toes, and I think part of it is his personality. I think, unlike his brother Tony, who was very gregarious and always laughing, always joking, I think Ridley is super focused. His assistant, whom I knew well, Anne Lai, said once, Ridley has no friends. She said, if you see a person coming up to you saying, I'm friends with Ridley, he's lying.
Yeah, I've heard similar things from other people. So working on a storyboard then, I've made some behind the scenes stuff myself, and I've always been fascinated. The arrival of DVD was when a lot of people first kind of saw storyboards compared to the final product. And I always think that's a fascinating idea, that you've got that first initial visual draft, if you like, in the storyboard, and then you've got the final film to kind of compare and see what has happened somewhere in between. What is your responsibility then as a storyboard artist, or what was it?
Okay, the one of the things I didn't do in this big book that I'm putting out is I didn't do this. I didn't do the frame by frame comparison because I hate it. I hate that. I hate it because I think, in my view of what storyboarding is, and at this point, when I started in the business, I would never have said anything like that, because I was supposed to just be learning and discovering a process. I've been doing it for 3 decades, so I can start saying, okay, I think I know why I hold the opinions I do. And I think this kind of business of comparing storyboards and finished frames sends absolutely the wrong signal. It suggests that the storyboards are some kind of a limitation or a trap, some kind of a template that the director somehow must have followed. And it's almost as if you go, well, look, looks the same. That's good. Doesn't look the same. No good. And there's a danger of oversimplifying the nature of these things. I've heard directors I love say terrible things about storyboarding because they don't understand how that works. Probably because they've never met a storyboard artist who's actually sufficiently keen on filmmaking in order to be able to hit it off for them. It's as simple as that. A lot of artists, I hate to say this, but a lot of artists are almost autistic. They're people who have very poor communication skills, very limited interests. They might play one musical instrument. They might be obsessed with collecting stamps on the side or something. But they're not terribly fun people to talk to. They're not gregarious. They're not open. They don't read a lot, or many don't. And this is why they're attracted to illustration, because it cuts them off from all kinds of contact with outside life. That's about as opposite to a director's personality as you can get. And I think a lot of people forge their opinion of storyboards based on the people they meet. Now, it's kind of like judging a band by its fans or something. It's kind of problematic sometimes. And I think that this director I'd heard said something to the effect that, well, I'm not going to get trapped by little pieces of paper. This is a really good director. And I'm thinking, well, that's not what we do. We don't do that. Nobody gets trapped. But I know what he's talking about. He's talking about being a visually awkward person, maybe, who doesn't feel comfortable showing your producer these things and then having the producer say, well, this is great. That's what we're doing. which is not the point. The point is to use the board as an exploration.
Yeah.
It's an extension of the director's skill and tool. In other words, the storyboard artist theoretically should never bring anything to the conversation. If the director is present enough, the director can describe literally his entire shot list and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, or at least we're testing it this way, and we'll see where it goes. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's the ideal. And the ideal is that a director gets then to look at his film shot by shot in terms of composition, values. Are we better off as a close-up? Are we better off super wide? Are we better off holding this shot for a few beats before we cut away? Should we compose it this way? Should we walk in frame left, frame right? How does that balance out with the geometry of the next shot? Because you have to keep in mind, it's not like reading a comic. When you're in a movie theater or in front of your screen at home, television, whatever it is, you're sitting still and your head's not moving, and images are coming at you one after the other. And the march of time means that there's no going back. So your brain literally has to read information, sometimes extremely fast, in terms of where you last abandoned an object. The whole business about not crossing the line is actually not about a line, it's about left and right. It's about where your brain has read an element, a visual piece of the puzzle. And you're replacing these pieces super fast. So the reason making films, whether you like it or not, is a graphic exercise first and foremost, is because you're dealing with the graphics as your brain perceives the assembly of the puzzle. You know, people think they go to the theater to watch a movie, or they watch a movie in front of a television. If you say, what's the screen? They say, well, the screen is that thing in front of me. It's not. The screen is your brain. And a director is the person who places pieces inside of your brain one by one to tell you a story and make you believe what he's doing. And how good he is at doing that makes the difference. So the reason we prepare storyboards or visuals, or the reason some directors like Kubrick take photos instead of storyboarding, photos of every one of their angles through a particular lens. The reason we prepare is to do a first draft and a second draft and a third draft and a polish so that the prose of the director's language is delivered with absolute perfection so that the audience becomes hypnotized. That's what we're after. And a storyboard is just one of several possible ways of doing that. It's not the only one. It's not necessary. You do it when you can, when you have the right person to do it with. Or you could do it any other way. I've heard Woody Allen does a video version of his films with students, which he cuts before filming. So he runs through, basically. So that's what it is. That's all it is. And the idea isn't to replicate what you've done, but sometimes it's to discard everything you've done. So that the first pass, all the cliches and all the bad ideas can wash away, so that the next layer of thinking is better.
Yeah, more focused and
more focused, or more to the point, or more graphic or less graphic. Sometimes you want to free up your visual because you realize you have to deliver a lot of intellectual information, like dialogue. You don't want to have a very busy frame when you're trying to get people to process verbal information, etc., etc. So you want to balance out the values of your film, and that can require a lot of preparation, provided you're actually in control enough of graphics and of your graphics department to be able to make use of that time, so that the time spent reflecting on the graphics of your film is time that improves the film. It's not always the case. Again, if you're not a visual director, if you're an actor turned director, there's a good chance that it's pretty useless. Because actors typically focus on performance. A movie made by an actor is a film performance. It's not a deliberate performance of the environment or of the geometry of the film. It's strictly actors delivering information. That can work, but it's not a movie. It's a film performance. So, I mean, you instantly know who are the directors that are the virtuosos. You know, they're the Orson Welles's, the David Lean's, David Fincher, Stanley Kubrick, Otto Preminger. I mean, the list is long, but as soon as you think about their films, you go, well, yeah, of course, you know. So I think in a way, if you're interested in exploring the graphic power of films, that's where you end up. You end up with the Hitchcocks and the Finchers, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting watching. You did a video on Gladiator with Charles de Lauzarica, who I interviewed before, who actually connected us. And you talked about something I'd never really thought of before in terms of storyboards, because I'd always seen storyboards in a fairly simple fashion, I guess, in that it was about framing and it was about movement. I'd never really considered that you would be also talking to the director about depth of field as well, and trying to reproduce that in storyboards.
You can talk to the director about as many tools of his palette as the director wants to premeditate. And a good director who is strong visually will talk to you about all these things, but he'll only talk to you if he feels like you're able to handle it. You know, if you're familiar with the graphics of, let's say, Otomo Katsuhiro, the creator of Akira.
Yeah.
He's a guy, I learned a lot looking at his drawings in the 80s about depth of field in drawing, how to take a graphic line and translate it into what literally a long lens can see. There's a way of approaching perspective that actually crunches the verticals and the horizontals that gives you that feeling that you're looking through a telephoto lens. You can easily replicate that as a drawing if you know what you're doing. But I think a director who sees that a storyboard artist can handle that will probably never talk about it. On the other hand, a director who sees that his storyboard artist is looking at it from that perspective will go, what if we crunch this? And after a while, that becomes part of the conversation. So let's just, crunch that background, and we know what that is. And so now the frame is actually saying, oh, by the way, this is a long lens.
Yeah.
And you just see it. You don't have to write it. It's obvious that it is, because the compression that you're drawing, but for that, you have to be able to draw. It's very difficult to translate that compression effect of a lens if it's difficult for you to draw full stop, So again, it's a craft that's as good as the practitioners and usually as good as the director. You can't do a storyboard that's better than the director that you're doing it for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess technique is only one part of the equation. I mean, you're a very skilled artist, but I guess without having the ability to convey the meaning in that frame, it's kind of useless. Meaning's it's everything, surely, for the director.
It's the Wild West. The problem with storyboards is that it's a job that's highly misunderstood and it's poorly defended. So you have a few key directors who have defined really what a storyboard can be and how much one can get out of it. Hitchcock probably being the main one. He's the one who really imported storyboards and made them a usual staple in films. And he knew what he was looking for, and he knew that he would only shoot certain parts of the set, so he didn't want to bother building elements of set that he wasn't going to need. Talking to editors who've worked for Hitchcock, they'll say, you can't believe the rushes. I mean, he'll start filming in the middle of a sentence and it's cut before the sentence is over because he knows he's only using this tiny little bit of film. So the editors didn't really have to do anything. They didn't have a choice. They had very limited rushes to pick from, and Hitchcock was very happy. That's how he made his films. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Most young directors couldn't work like that. They'd be fired because studios love to interfere, but nobody interfered with Hitchcock, so he was able to do it. But I think a director who basically has spent a lot of time thinking about storyboarding, and Ridley is one of those, he does it himself most of the time, will know just how much you can burden the art department, the artist, the art director, etc. And that works in a certain way. The majority of directors aren't that specific. And because they're not that specific, anyone will do. And because anyone will do, that becomes the standard. And next thing you know, you can sound like a lunatic for trying to impose a certain kind of style that is only useful to 3 directors in the business.
Yeah.
Because it's not common. The average characterless common middle is something that leads to a completely different experience of the storyboarding process. So it's as good as the practitioners, literally.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting. This is why I love to talk to people who've worked with directors like that we're talking about, because it really opens up my view of what goes on, and just exactly how involved they can be, and how aware they are of the tools that are at their disposal. One thing that interests me is about how then you take the storyboard, and when does the art director, the production design department come into it? Are they there with you whilst the director's talking about
It depends
the storyboards?
It depends on the director and the environment he creates. Again, if we're talking about Ridley Scott, it'd be out of the question for departments to kind of fight each other, which seems like a given. But you'd be surprised how many departments are in competition on a film. So as far as Ridley's concerned, everybody gets the storyboard as soon as he's approved it. Make sure everybody has it. Make sure Janty, the costume designer, has it. Make sure Arthur has it, the production designer. Make sure so-and-so has it. Make sure the armorer has it. Communication has to be flowing, so everybody knows what we're doing at all times. I've been on films where it's the opposite, where people are fighting to get new information, and whoever has it's like the ring in Lord of the Rings. Everybody's like, seriously, it happens all the time. Part of the problem being a storyboard artist is you spend, how human beings can be. They're pretty grotesque sometimes. And as a storyboard artist, you spend all your time with the director, which very quickly earns you the contempt of the producer, the production designer, and all these people who can't get a meeting with them. So pretty soon, people can get hostile about, who's got what information, etc. It seems trivial, but it's actually a very big part of the job is handling that stuff. And you're in situations where sometimes, if all goes well, all the departments have a nice flow. But usually that's not the case. Usually one guy is over here making decisions. Somebody comes in, interferes. Somebody gets protective, etc., etc. So that depends on a number of things. Power. If a director is powerful, again, the job depends on who you do it for. A powerful director will say, let's get a storyboard artist now. And producer just runs and says, are you available? If there's cases where the director doesn't want to make choices, the film's coming and everything is massing up, and the last thing the director wants to do is make decisions. So the producer gets worried and says, let's get a storyboard artist to focus him. That's a very different job right there. In one case, you're wanted, in the other, you're not.
Yeah.
So the director will deal with you differently. The production design department feels ambivalent. They fear the storyboard artist because the storyboard artist is like a permission that the director has to start dreaming out loud. And it means we're probably going to see things that aren't in the script and that are not budgeted. And the production designer doesn't want his budget to go up because he knows he's not going to get a cent more. He doesn't want to have to build 3 times the amount of sets or the scale or whatever. So they can be pretty apprehensive. People want to see the storyboard because they want to know what's going on, but they don't always like it. Directors of photography hate us. They want to kill us. They don't want to see us around. They'll never admit to it, but they really, their feeling is, I don't need this guy. I can create a
As if they're taking part of, you're taking part of their job almost. Is that the feeling?
Well, again, it's a misunderstanding if anybody feels that way, but there is a battle for control of the camera and the camera operation and the composition, except with powerful directors. So again, you take the example of a typical film made for television or for, large audiences, like a rom-com of some kind. The director may be pretty good. He may be a very good actor, director, stage director, may have great experience on the set, but not be particularly visually keen. Makes perfect sense for him to rely on his production designer and his art and his director of photography to kind of set up the shot the way they see fit and then do their coverage based on that. Those are pretty normal films. You see those films everywhere. That's not master directing, though. So a master director is somebody who has a language. And a language for a Fincher or Hitchcock is like a signature language. There's a way to approach a scene. There's a way to get out of a scene. Spielberg, all these guys, it's like filmmaking with a capital F multiplied by 6. It's like, whoa. So if we're talking about this kind of filmmaking, the director of photography almost doesn't matter. He's there to light. But actually getting behind and getting the shot just right is a matter of such precision that nobody can touch the director's decision on this. So you have to be powerful to be an exquisite director, because people don't let you make those choices otherwise. This is something people don't realize. I actually remember talking to Ridley about this, and he said people would be shocked if they understood how much of the filmmaking they see is a complete accident. How it's really left to chance and to the crew and to chaos. They would be shocked if they understood that there's only a tiny percentage of people who are directing films who actually know what they're doing. And I believe him. I mean, I can attest to that. It's true. And so again, a precise, masterful director is handling his choices of frames on a level which is so sophisticated that neither the production designer nor the director of photography understand what he's doing. And when you're talking about mastering film language on that level, literally the least aware of what's going on are the directors of photography, because they're concerned with creating a pretty image. And they're always lobbying to get a better shot from over here, which a good director will say, we can't do that. They usually don't elaborate, but they can't do that because it's wrong in terms of language.
Yes.
And so what is this language? Again, this is a movie course if we get into this.
Yeah.
But it's real. This is the linguistics of films is ultimately what it's about.
Yeah. And you're releasing this book. Is it this month you're releasing the Los Angeles book?
It's in November that we release it. Yeah.
So I had a little preview of. I saw some of the preview of some of the images, and it's certainly a book that I would like to get my hands on. It looks fantastic. What kind of drove you to, or what the circumstances that arrived in your life where you thought now is the time to make a book?
Now's the time. There's been suggestions for many years from various people who said, well, you've worked for a lot of cool films, blah, blah, blah. And I also have a style which I guess is publishing friendly, which they often tell you on films, like on Matrix, when they were looking for illustrators. We're looking for illustrators that look good in print. Huh. Are you paying for? No. But it's a big thing now because they sell books all the time. So they tend to look for illustrators who've got training in a certain area. So I've had quite a few offers, but one of the things that's always kind of spooked me, and it happened recently, a couple of years ago, actually, with a major British publisher who said, we want to do a book. I said, fine. And then they go, and cool, then we can, call Tim Burton and ask him to do like a piece. And then we can ask Jean-Pierre Jeunet, and we can ask, Ridley or somebody, and we can have like an article by them on their film. And pretty soon I thought, this isn't going to be my book. So I said, forget that. Let's just not do that. And so that happened quite a lot as well, because you realize the industry works on a certain level, and that level is never about promoting what you do, ultimately. It's about moving units, talking about celebrity. And I was talking to a publisher just a couple of years ago, right after that, and said, if I ever do a book, it's just going to be drawings. It's not going to be any movie titles. I'm not going to identify these drawings by saying Gladiator, this, that. And the guy said, yeah, cool, let's do that.
Huh. You found the right guy, finally.
So then, once I was liberated from that, I thought, well, it's okay to acknowledge some of the directors that I really admire, because that's a very different thing. I can't talk about my love for film without talking about some of these people who mean a lot to me. Not necessarily people I've worked for. So many of them I haven't worked for, but I've met, and they were great directors. People like Sidney Lumet, people like William Friedkin, whom I got to know a little bit. Great people that are worth mentioning. And immediately what I realized is that art books, I've seen a lot of them. I own a lot of them. I never look at them. I buy them once, I flip through quickly, I file them, and never see them again. And I thought what bothers me is that you're not accompanied. You don't have a manifesto that comes with it. So I felt ready this time to kind of talk about 30 years of reflecting on film language, exactly what I was talking about. Why does the camera go here and not there? You know, that famous quote from Fincher, there's 100 different ways to set up a shot, but ultimately only 2, and one of them is wrong. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to explain what he means by that? Which only 2 and which one is wrong? It's an interesting question, because once you get into this, you start really appreciating what these guys are doing. So I thought, let's have a book that's rich in text as well. Let's talk about film and directors and how they view their craft. What do they admire? Why are classic movies as important as they are to all these people? And I even did something in it where, to illustrate some of the best film linguistics that I know, I gave a list of about 160 films, which to me are the best illustrations of the pictures who really work along those hypnotic lines that we're talking about. And once that text was in, I thought, yeah, this is the right thing to do in a book. It's no longer just a book of drawings, but it's more about reflecting on film, graphics, what's the role of art and illustration in movies, because it's not, a lot of people don't necessarily understand why do illustrators, what's the relationship between drawing and the filmed image, etc., etc. So that's the sort of book it is. It's kind of it's a meditation on all of that, all that we're discussing now.
Yeah. And was there ever a moment where you must have been going through hundreds, thousands of different frames that you'd drawn. Were there any moments where you kind of had, actually, that's pretty damn good? You'd almost, because the thing is, you end up, when you're a creative person, you sort of immerse yourself into the thing that you're doing currently. And then sometimes when a certain amount of time has passed, you come back to it and you see it with fresh eyes. Was there any way you just kind of went, actually, that's pretty damn good, or it wasn't as good as I remembered, or?
Well, the stuff that wasn't as good as I remembered just got discarded. What I thought, I worked with an art director, a wonderful lady named Natalie that my publisher introduced me to, and I said, I need to work with an art director. I can't do it alone. And so we sat down about a year ago, and I brought a hard drive filled with scans of images and things, and she panicked at first. She said, this is too much. And she created folders after folders, categories. And then we looked. And as I looked, if I saw drawings that I thought didn't hold up, I thought, I'm not going to torture myself by printing stuff that makes me uneasy. So let's just remove any drawing that makes me uncomfortable, because I think it's too weak. And let's, because some stuff is just done, I would have to spend hours just redrawing or something, and it's just not stuff you want to show. But at the same time, they weren't very interesting drawings. Interestingly, we kept drawings that were not perfect, but that told a story that the book is trying to talk about. And because I had another pair of eyes, if I said, oh, I don't really care for this, she'd go, this is good, you keep it. And I'm
okay, yeah.
So I was very obedient, and I used her eyes to tell me if something was appropriate or inappropriate. Sometimes there were drawings I was really in love with, and she looked at me and said, we don't need this, we have that. And other times I said, I'm annoyed by this, and she said, that's nothing. It's a good drawing. It stays. So it was good. It was good, because in the end...
I was going to say, it would have been a very different book if it had just been you without the art director.
It wouldn't have been any good. She did everything.
Yeah,
she was the sort of space I needed, and she was very clever in organizing the rhythms of the book, separating little sections of storyboards with more images. She said, okay, now here's a place for a text. Your text about this goes here. And she was just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And a fresh pair of eyes saves you so much grief and so much time. And she was very good. I mean, she worked with color wheels. She did the most amazing thing. She found a book, a French book, that identifies something like 50 different directors and creates color wheels based on the color patterns of their films. And in the book, we based the sort of color arrangements per section without mentioning the directors, just based strictly on some of these color wheel ideas. I mean, it was like brilliant
That's
stuff.
really good. Yeah.
It's just really brilliant.
It makes that kind of subliminal connection to those directors that you'll feel it without even knowing it.
It's
Yeah.
everywhere in it, and so I thought, wow, this is way above what I could have thought of. She was really
that's
into
great.
it and did a great job. And so I looked at the drawings and thought, once they're in an environment with a frame around them, and they go into a book and there's text next to them, a lot of these look a lot better than I remembered them to. So I that's it. I wasn't that surprised. I just thought, I don't look at my own work usually. So digging it up after all these years, I discovered that in some ways I think I was better 20 years ago than I am now for certain things. We don't steadily evolve. Like we can explore different areas. There's things I used to do that I wouldn't be able to do again, and vice versa.
Where can people find the book? Is it in general bookstores, or is it a particular website they need to visit?
There's definitely a website, which is the publisher's website, Caurette. It's CAURETTE.com. The book will be available in Great Britain through the major specialized comics dealers. It could be people like Forbidden Planet. Bookstores like that will have it. I forget the name of the distributor, but it's a major English distributor that's going to be carrying it. So I'm guessing anything that's connected to science fiction and graphic novels will be the kind of bookstore. It may even be available through Amazon. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll be sure to put a link in the podcast notes, because I'm sure like-minded individuals will want to check it out.
I'll fill in the details on the British the British distribution. It eludes me at the moment, but
sure,
I'm pretty sure it'll be fully available. Yeah,
cool. You're one of these people that, if you weren't extremely likable and easy to talk to, that I would probably dislike, because you're hugely talented and you're also now a filmmaker in your own right, and you've been working on a film for a little while now. What can you talk a little bit about Brand X, the movie?
Brand X. So Brand X, the movie, it requires a little bit of introduction. Brand X is a band, jazz fusion. I think it's the best description. It's instrumental band. This kind of music was really big in the 70s. It's a sort of along the lines, if this speaks to your listeners, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Weather Report. But this is more English, which has a different twist to it. But it's instrumental, jazz, electronic, fusion, experimental, almost prog. And I discovered them in the 1970s. Always liked their music because I listened to a lot of jazz and a lot of variants of jazz. And their claim to fame was largely that Phil Collins was their drummer. Phil Collins was an exquisite drummer. He was a lot of things, good and bad, but man, was he a drummer. And so that's really where people heard Phil Collins' drum, and his drumming chops was in Brand X, and people realized what he was up to, and it was staggering. So when he left, when he went off to do his strictly solo career in 1980, he basically left a lot of stuff behind, including these guys, and they vanished. They disappeared, as bands do. I was in a cab in Los Angeles about 25 years ago. My car had broken down. And I was talking to the driver about music because he was playing some jazz. And I said, "Do you know Brand X?" And the guy turns, looks at me and goes, "Did you know the guitarist from Brand X drives a taxi in this company?"
No.
And I was just blown away.
Wow.
I didn't even understand the economics of the music industry at the time. I was just coming back from Japan, and I'd seen their records in a big record store, the equivalent HMV in Tokyo. And I didn't understand why a musician would be driving a cab in Los Angeles with his albums selling all over the world. And I immediately thought, this is a subject for something I want to do. I want to make a movie. The band didn't exist. It was impossible. A couple of years ago, they announced that they were reforming. So I got on a plane, went and met them immediately and said, "I want to do a film." I had no idea what I was going to do, how I was going to do it. And they said, why not? And so I've been filming ever since. I've been following them and going through their upheavals. They're smack in the middle of an interesting dispute at the moment. The bass player is leaving.
Right.
So all of that is stuff that's going to be in the film. It's a movie about loss in largely because it's called The Desert Years, Brian Deck's The Desert Years, and it's exploring what's happened to music, but also generally what happens to artistry once a flow gets interrupted. And what I was interested in is telling their story through 30 years of not being able to perform as musicians and what they had to go through in their own desert, their own wilderness. So it's been a really interesting setup for looking at lives, creative lives. These are people who've, like many people in music and in art, have gone through a lot of hardship. And I've hung in there because fundamentally the art and the craft is more important than anything else to them. The dedication. So that's what I wanted to look at, is dedication and focus. And we're recording music with them as well for the film. We've been filming live performances. So it's technically it's a jigsaw puzzle, and it's fascinating. And I've been paying out of pocket, so I have to do a lot of storyboards to finance the film.
How many hours of footage have you accrued so far?
I have about 60 hours of footage, of raw footage. And I figure it's going to take, literally, to do a 90-minute movie, it's going to take me about 90 hours of footage, which is pretty good. It means I can really curate and come right down to the very best material that I can find. A lot of it is just, recording music with musicians, sometimes far apart from one another. It's complicated. It's a technical nightmare at times, and it requires a specialized crew, sound engineers that are very, very specifically focused on a particular aspect of recording. And it's it's been a great experience. It's just difficult because the pandemic has frozen everything, and so I haven't shot in a year. Literally, I haven't been able to do anything.
Yeah,
but it's a good project, and I still don't know how I'm going to distribute it. I have to find distributors to help me decide what it's going to be. Is it going to be a festival film? Is it going to be a straight to DVD thing? I don't know at the moment. I'm hoping that will get sorted. I had to film immediately because my musicians are in their 70s, and it sounds a bit cynical, but I didn't have much time. And I knew I didn't have much time. So if I contacted a couple of people, including people who formerly worked at the BBC, and said, "What do you think?" And said, "Well, if you do this or if you do that," and I could tell it was just never going to happen if I had to seduce people into giving me money. And so I went straight ahead and started shooting. Yeah,
good for you. Yeah, it's important, isn't it, as well, I think, as you said, not having the time necessarily, given the age of the guys. One of the reasons I started interviewing people about their work on film and then going into the podcast some years later was when my grandfather died, who was a great storyteller, and we were all trying to remember his stories, and we were missing those vital elements that made it interesting. And it's really important. I feel there's a certain imperative that I need to kind of to do this with certain people.
I get it. I mean, that's exactly my motive. I thought that I saw, having had the good fortune or terrible fortune, I can't decide, of being born at this curious time in history, which is sometime during the 60s and 70s, when this explosion of incredible work that gave us Pink Floyd and Kubrick and all this stuff, which will never come back. Yep. And I suddenly saw the doors starting to close on all of it. And it occurred to me that memory is as good as what we record. And so there's a lot of bands and a lot of musicians and a lot of filmmakers and people like that I've loved deeply, but all of them have their own films. This band doesn't. So I thought, if I don't do it, no one will. And I'm not letting this go. That door is not shutting without me catching these guys and putting them on film. It's just not happening. And so that was the impetus. But I get it. And I think literally we make memory when we do that, because the memory of future generations will be composed of the things we're recording.
Yes.
That's it. There's nothing else.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a brilliant way to put it. Yeah, it's such a difficult time at the moment, isn't it? You know, the creative industries are really struggling. In the UK, we're not getting any support from the government. I mean, our Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, said that artists need to retrain and go and get kind of proper jobs, in inverted commas. I don't think they were exact words, but it
That's what
does.
we're hearing everywhere. Yeah, people are
Yeah.
saying, "Well, you guys have had your fun. Now go back and get a real job." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what they're failing to recognise is the importance of art in society and why we need it and the function that it serves. It's far beyond anything that you can quantify.
It's true. I also think there's a little bit of contempt in this, which is,
Yeah.
you guys never had real jobs anyway. You're just having fun and hanging out with girls. That's people's perceptions, which may be true. What they're failing to realize, as you say, is that on the one hand, the survival of the soul largely depends on the survival of art in a society like ours. The other thing is people don't quite gauge the amount of pain. And again, back to this thing of dying for your art. It sounds lofty, but for making a film right now about people who literally almost died because of their art and
Yeah.
certainly starved for 30 years, and I mean starved. I think this is what attracts me to the subject, is that this is something people don't talk about very much, but it's there. It's there right beneath the surface with everybody. Last year, we interviewed a guitarist I quite like. His name is Steve Hackett. He's a guitarist from Genesis, from the old Genesis, the good kind.
Yeah.
And he used to know the guys from Brand X, and so we did a long interview with him. But I told him I'd like to talk about Brand X, obviously, but I want to talk about you and your own sort of desert. And he said, boy, and we went off, spoke for hours about the hardship in his own life. And so you'd never think guitarists from such great bands, can have gone through so much difficulties over the years. But people love talking about this. They don't often get asked about it. But it's a very, very moving subject when they start saying, oh, you want to hear about how tough it gets. And they open up. And I find we live in a perfect time for exploring this subject. I think we've been sold on the glamour of artistic lives and all the fun that it is. I don't think we've had an honest conversation about what it means to literally protect your creation and try to save it from being devoured by cynicism and business and all that stuff. So again, this is a very big subject for me.
Yeah, and I think it's a subject that needs to be talked about because there'll be people like myself who've had a little bit of a taste of what it can be like. And I'm talking about a tiny taste of what it can be like when suddenly all of your work disappears, all of your livelihood disappears, and all of the things you've laid out in front of you for the future disappears in a matter of days. It was for me. I had the best year of working year ready, best income for the year, and it just disappeared.
Yeah.
And you suddenly realize how difficult it is to exist on the benefit system, or even if you don't want to go down that road, even worse. So yeah, it is a subject that really does need to be
terrifying purge that's going on, because a lot of people will not be able to get back into their career. Which means the arts will suffer. They are already suffering. And by extension, again, people's soul will be lacking the next, Dylan or the next. All these people rescue us. For me, I certainly owe my survival to music, largely, more so than art. I'm much closer to music in my heart and to filmmaking than I am to drawing. But music probably more than anything. And it's not until that stuff has vanished that you realize how dependent you are on it. All you need to do is pay attention to the amount of cover versions of great songs that are on the radio today, which suggests that there aren't as many people writing really powerful songs as there once used to be. So a lot of people will say, well, that's just nostalgia, get over yourself, etc. It's easy to say. I'm unconvinced. I'm deeply unconvinced. I don't think that we live in an era where great creative spirits are thriving.
Yeah, I think it's something to do with the mechanics of that industry and how people are kind of bought into it, and they make a product of the person immediately. And, another massive influence surely has to be the fact that we're connected to our devices all the time and we don't have room to imagine. My kids, they said to me, "Oh, can I bring my phone to the car?" And, no, we're driving for 2 hours. You're going to look out the window. That's where I am at as a parent.
Well, what you say is interesting, because one of the things, and this kind of circles back to the conversation we had earlier about production design, artwork, concept work, all that sort of thing. A lot of what's going on in our era is technology coming in as a crutch, as a way to sort of get us over the difficulty and the pain of learning a craft and getting better at it on your own, which is a form of cultivating your own wisdom. It's like going into the cave for a certain amount of years and coming out with your acquired gift of wisdom, the fire that you've attained from the gods, that kind of thing. All of that is being dispelled. All you need to do is buy the latest version of Houdini or Maya, and Bob's your uncle. Learn to work with it, get a job, go do some visual effects. You're an artist. The problem with that is, of course, these crutches may be diminishing the amount of wisdom that's available amongst the practitioners. It used to be that you could only get on stage if you really had mastered a few chords with your guitar and the poetry of being a songwriter. A Joni Mitchell is just something that comes from heaven. And she's not the only one. Beth Orton, any female folk singer, etc. Every area of music has got this kind of this personality that seems to be coming with a package, a baggage of beautiful mastery. I don't think this is being encouraged anymore, because I think technology acting as a crutch has kind of diminished the value of mastery. And we're seeing this in music. It's wonderful that you can have a garage band at your fingertips. You no longer need to work with a great drummer or a great bass player. You can do it all yourself. But what happens when you no longer need to work with a great player, a great bass player, and a great drummer is you don't.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you're doing your album all by yourself, and it sounds like it. It's okay.
You hit the ceiling quicker, don't you? Yeah.
You do, and you're not being challenged by people who are kind of rubbing up against you their own level of excellence. And so technology has insinuated itself into the artistic life to the point where it's making a lot of actual raw talent irrelevant. That's dangerous. It's affecting the quality of movies, I think, greatly. It's affecting the quality of music. It's like the bar is being lowered softly but surely.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. How have you found lockdown then as an artist yourself? Has it been a time for reflection, or have you found it, as many creative people have, a difficult time to find focus? You described it as flow interrupted earlier on. Has it been like that for you?
Yeah, what's infuriating to me is that time passes and the ticking clock of urgency I was mentioning is definitely ticking louder for me. I can feel it. There's a lot of problems arising around the band, including certain health issues with one or two of the members that have mercifully I've filmed already a lot of stuff. Yeah. But it's forced me to really be aware that I'm fighting the clock on this. It's one thing. On the other, I'm concerned about work, like a lot of people. There's no work. I haven't worked in months. And I know everybody in my industry is like that, pretty much. There's a few guys that are on a rotating thing with video games and things like that, but it's not really the business I'm in. And I'm wondering what's going to happen when the cloud lifts. You're going to have tens of thousands of people looking for one job, which never happens. Usually we hopscotch. Yeah. So there's always a little bit of lag time, but there's always something around the corner. I'm not really sure what that's going to be like for anybody. So my lockdown experience was okay because I'm certainly used to being by myself. I have a guitar here, which keeps me company. I've played a lot of guitar this year. So I'm not complaining. It was great. Actually, first thing I did when I realized there wasn't going to be anything else is I just pulled out the musical instruments, plugged everything in, and the whole year went by. But there is an anxiety, quite apart from being at peace at home, which is thinking about what's next year going to be like.
Yeah.
Is it going to be worse? Is it going to be the same?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm not enjoying this at all.
Yeah, luckily I'm back at work now. As I said to you before we started recording, working in sports television, which is not something I ever intended to do. It's something I kind of fell into, but I've been a freelancer for a number of years, for 10 or 12 years now, and it was always that I had the choice to go and do something else in my mind, and it's now that choice has kind of been taken away, and the potential income of the future has gone away. I mean, I'm working right now. I've just been working for the last since the start of July. Very fortunate. But I don't know if it's going to end suddenly. I don't know if I need to keep that money for next year. I've got kids, I have a wife, I have a house and all of that stuff. And there is this kind of low level of anxiety and stress just bubbling under every single thing I do at the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's the same for everyone. You know, I go to work and it's PPE, it's sanitizing, and all of that little extra level is going to have a big impact on us. And
I sense that as well. You know, I don't really know. It's weird. I started working on the book without any sense that it was going to be my main project. I thought, well, it's just, hopefully we'll find the time to fit it in. And next thing you know, there was nothing else to do.
Yeah.
So it's good for the book. It gave me an entire year to sort of, again, noodle everything and look at every line of text and search out for typos and things.
Yeah, and you're gonna come out of your cave a more accomplished guitarist as well, hopefully.
That's good. Yeah, I've actually, because I hadn't played my guitar in many years, or certainly not played it seriously, and I play a classical guitar. I'd forgotten so many pieces, so I learned new ones. I think
nice.
that's a good thing to do. But yeah, in terms of I'll come out of my cave and I'll probably go on what you do, I'm told, when you have a book out is you go promote it. So what I'll do is I'll go do signings, and it'll keep me busy. And hopefully what I'm looking forward to is, in a way, getting feedback. It's funny because it's an art book, and I'm not thinking about the drawings so much. I'm thinking about the contents, the text.
Yeah,
and I want to get feedback on the text. I want to hear what other people have to say out there about some of the things that I discuss having to do with classic films, classic directors, language, film as language, conversation nobody's really having enough, I think. Movies and television series have become so important in people's lives, especially in lockdown time. But you realize how the language of film is now part of our vernacular. And how we have such little ability or impetus to discuss what the grammar of this language is. How we take a lot of it for granted and say, well, this was pretty good, I think, or was this good? I don't know what to think of it. And lacking a basis of a strong intellectual basis for actually analyzing image. What is image for us today? What's our relationship to image? What do we bring into it? What do we get out of it? This is some profound things that I think are time to ask, and I'm really curious to find out what people want to say about it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, because I think we've got to a point in society and in the filmmaking world in particular where there seems, and we talked about it a moment ago with regards to technology, where people think that there's a quick fix, that you can do a 2-hour course with with a director on YouTube and suddenly you're a director yourself. There's somehow a shortcut to reach.
It's an interesting thing to talk about, is the scam of masterclasses and the rush of all these seminars that are being sold online to unsuspecting youths who generally have to scrape a few bucks to buy something that it turns out is mostly useless to them. And I'm quite adamant about this. There's actors, people who suffer. It's very hard being an actor and trying to find a footing, and to be scammed by people selling you 2-hour, 3-hour online masterclasses, which teach you nothing. It's garbage, and you get all these big actors participate because they earn millions doing it. but I think it's appalling. You get this with screenwriters as well. All these
Yeah.
fake screenwriting seminars. So what is this scam, and what does it have in common? Well, what they all have in common is they don't address the most important thing, which is the economy that we live in. What does it mean to want to do these jobs? To your own life? Should we have an honest economic conversation about what you have to sacrifice when you get into these professions? I mean, do you really want to buy a house? Do you really want to raise children? Because at some point you're going to come up against that. You're going to have to really analyze what economy you live in. It's not to discourage people, but to really show them what a sacrifice it is to enter these professions. And the other thing is an honest conversation about the amount of training that's required in order to reach excellence. It's not a 2-hour practice on a computer program. What it really is years of, perhaps going back to what you talked about earlier, which is mentoring. Living around professionals that are accomplished and that can let their own standards seep into you and try to raise your game so that you don't bring down the whole game, but rather you rise up to it. Because that's literally what's at stake. When you get 10,000 people coming out of art school, all deciding they're not going to work very hard, pretty soon they set the standard.
Yes, yeah.
So what do we do? Whose standards matter? And I think, in a way, it's a responsibility some of us have who've been lucky enough to work with some really talented people, to write our own manifestos and to stake a claim to the territory we defend and say, this is why we believe it's important to do things this way.
Yeah.
And in a way, again, that's part of maturing, is understanding that we all have a responsibility. I mean, I saw myself as a student for all these years because I worked with such important people. And I'm realizing now that they're all dying that it's down to people of my generation to say this matters. Because if we don't, then it dies with us. So we're here to do a testimonial, but also to preserve certain standards. Kind of like the elders, used to say, we preserving good manners because they're important. Well, look at what happens if you don't. You get Trump.
Yeah.
So how do you like that? Because that's what happens literally when you unlock those mental locks that prevent people from slumping.
Yeah.
Everything falls.
Yeah, it soon unravels, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's great though that there are people like yourself who've got to this point where they understand that and they're willing to share their experience to give future generations a better understanding of what it takes to do something like this. I always think of the directors like Ridley and like Kubrick who they got their skill through experience. They worked on commercials, or Kubrick shot 1 million photographs over a few years, and you're not going to learn it through just watching it.
I don't think we should lie to anybody about there's nothing wrong with watching a seminar, but
of course.
But I think it's really a set of false expectations if you don't tell people, listen, you need at least 15 years of solid practice before you can be any good at any of this.
Yeah.
It's the old Malcolm Gladwell, I think, thing about 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
I think. I haven't counted, but I think there's a logic in there somewhere, which is that you have to pay the dues. This idea of paying the dues is being dispelled by companies who sell you computer programs.
Yeah.
And there's no getting around it, because if you're going to be useful in any position making films or creating media, you have to have had the capacity to take punches in the gut, and you have to understand the stakes. You have to have kind of thickened your own skin through living.
Yeah.
This is how you become good as well, is learning to see trouble coming at you. So directors do it all the time. A lot of their time is spent harnessing energy to get away from complicated actors, from complicated studios that are trying to trip them up. I'd say it's 60% of what they do is actually avoiding blows.
Yeah.
So they can carry out their work. Well, how are you going to do that with that experience?
Yes, yeah.
Ridley used to say you have about 100 battles on a film. So he said, carefully pick out the three you want to win.
That's a great line. Yeah. Maybe we end things there then. I appreciate talking to you. I appreciate you giving your time, and I hope that people seek out your book, Los Angeles, and yeah, I'm looking forward to getting it myself. I'd pre-ordered it, and yeah, a large box will arrive, and I'll think, what did I order, or what has my wife ordered now? And I'll open it up, and I'll be delighted to see that it's your book.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about all this. It's these are important subjects to me, so I always welcome a chance to kind of to touch on that. And I regret that a book is as short as it is. At 400 pages, I wasn't even able to say much. We scratched the surface, but it's a start of a conversation.
Yeah, and the start of a new way of artistry for you. Maybe there'll be more books in the future, who knows?
Maybe there might be less drawing in them and more theory.
Yeah, I get that sense that that's where you're shifting towards.
Well, there's a lot to say.
I really hope you enjoyed the chat I had with Sylvain as much as I did. Really interesting guy, and I hope that we stay in touch. I'm really looking forward to getting his book, which, as I said, I've pre-ordered. It looks like the sort of book that I'm just going to pore over for days and days, wishing I had that superpower of being able to draw. I do regard it as a superpower. For next time, I've got a couple of choices. I'm not sure which order I'm going to do it in yet, but I do have a stuntman called Ben Dimmock, who I'm hoping to speak to soon once he comes out of some recent surgery. And I'm also hoping to speak to another very interesting chap called Marty Brennies. After he saw Star Wars, he was given the number of a place called Sprocket Systems in Marin County that may ring a bell. He was suggested to me by a guy called Johnny Banter, who I follow on Twitter, who's an effects guy. He's got his own story to tell, and I'm looking forward to talking to him. Hope you join me next time, whoever I'm talking to. And if you can, please do support me on patreon.com/Jamie Benning. Even if you can just donate $1 per month or every couple of months, that would be fantastic. It just helps me continue to make things like this in my videos. Thanks to all of you lovely patrons on Patreon who are continuing to support me. I really do appreciate it. Couldn't do it without you. So thanks so much. Hope you can join me next time. See you soon. Don't be a dick, wear a mask.